Hello, welcome to our July 20th, 2021 Club Cubase live stream. I'm going to do a quick audio test and we'll get started. Bear with me just a second. Hello, welcome to our... Okay, sounds like the audio is coming through just fine on my monitoring computer. So my name is Greg Undo. I'll be the host for the live stream today. I'm presenting from the United States and outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. So if you have not attended a Club Cubase live stream before, how it works is you could ask questions in the chat field or submit questions in advance to clubcubase at steinberg.de. And as we ask questions, it's always helpful if we could, include which version of Cubase, which operating system. That information is helpful. And if we will have lots of questions and it'll exceed my ability to answer questions. If your question doesn't get answered immediately, or I may be falling behind, so I will try to get through all the questions chronologically. But if we could try to avoid perhaps asking the same question over and over again, that would be appreciated. So just so if we could try to, again, just try asking the same questions repeatedly, that would be great. So we'll try to, it just kind of slows down the whole process. So a couple people I just wanted to give some recognition to. So we will have a timestamp either later tonight or early tomorrow morning on all the topics that are covered in the live stream. But if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com, and Jan from Stockholm, who I believe is on the live stream already, he's the kind person who has assembled that information, so it's a wonderful resource. If you're looking for other like non-official Steinberg resources to learn a lot about Cubase, you can check out the Cubase Nation Discord. And we have Jazz Dude that's done a lot of work on compiling different resources available there. We also have people that are serving as moderators that help out. So I want to give a special thanks to Agent K and to Jazz Dude. So we will wait just a minute for people to get logged in, and then we will go ahead and get started answering questions. So, okay, so that's all right. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have a lot of familiar faces, including Pablo, Filter Freak, John Costigan, Claude P. Okay, so first question from Claude P. 2 quickies. Any way to split the screen with the key and score editor horizontally? I remember using a key command to cycle through the lower zone key editor and score, but I can't find it. So let's go ahead and let's say if I wanted to come over here to my score editor. So if I wanted to just switch between the different editors, I don't remember the key command myself. So let's see if we can find it quickly. It might be under editors. So here you could have a dedicated, open drum editor in lower zone, open score editor in lower zone, open key editor in lower zone. So you could assign key commands directly to those particular functions right there. And let's see if there's a key command to just toggle between the editors, but you could assign key commands just to go to those different edit views right there. Okay, so you see audio and video is okay from John Costigan. And all right, so we have Detlef from Dusseldorf. All right, great to see Terry Dean. All right, just go through. Okay, so we see question. Hi, Greg. Been trying to figure out how sidechaining a reverb to a vocal if the vocal doesn't get swamped with the verb today, and got so frustrated. Could you walk us through? Got Cubase Artist 11. So let's go ahead and take a quick look. Sidechaining a reverb. So there's a couple different approaches to do this. All right, so let's say I will come to this project and let me check my connections here. Sorry about that. All right, so say if I wanted to put a big reverb on the vocal here, so I will just come over to the reverb and let's just exaggerate our verb here. And we'll make it into something like a big concert hall. Let's say maybe I want the piano to trigger the reverb to be the sidechain source. So I will come to the particular effects channel here. And I'll go to the inserts, and I'm just going to put maybe a compressor directly after this. And with this compressor, I'm going to activate this side chain. And then we'll select our source as being from the grand. So you can hear how the reverb will just kind of, as the piano is playing more. I think we'll have a space where maybe the piano hold a chord. So that's how you can do it. So on the effects channel itself, put a side chainable effect like your compressor, and then at that point, simply, sorry, just a cable here. At that point, just come over and put the compressor right after the reverb, and then activate the sidechain and choose the source that you want to serve as the sidechain trigger. So I'm just going to unplug one cable here so I don't have buzzy sounds. All right, so let's move on to, it's wonderful to see Sable Winters on the live stream. And Kristen D68. All right, and Jimmy George, wonderful to see you from Atlanta. Okay, so we see African Entertainment checking in from Finland, just thanking us for doing all the live streams, so you're welcome. All right, and we have Theodore from London. All right, just going through all the different people here, going through the comments. Okay, so we have a question. Can we create a MIDI file that after we duplicate and modify in all duplicated MIDI? Okay, so let's say I wanted to take a bass part here. or say I'll just take perhaps a guitar part. So now I'll just revert this. I don't have washed with reverb. All right, so let's say I have just a quick guitar part. All right, so I will come over and I'll just record quickly something on that guitar part. So I'll come here. Okay, so I have this particular event, and if we look at it visually, so a lot of times when we're dealing with MIDI, we may want to perhaps copy an event. And if I duplicate this event, and then if I change the original source event, these other copies of that are not going to actually reflect all of the edits that have been made. So this has been changed, but these are from the original. So how can we do what's called a shared copy? One way is just to hit Control K. And so once we do this, I think it's Control K, you'll see this option for shared copies. So I can say I want 3 copies. And so now when I edit particular notes here, I can move these notes up an octave. You'll see that those parts will reflect. I'll undo, and if you look at this part and these parts, if I undo the edits I just made, they will show. So any edit that I make in this part is automatically carried directly over to the other parts. Now, if I wanted those to be independent, let's say I want the second one to be independent, I think if we go to edit, and I think it's maybe under functions, we could say convert to real copy. And now if I make changes in this particular one, the second one will be independent. So that's a real copy and not a shared copy. And you can see that a part is a shared copy when you see these 2 little lines, these horizontal lines in the upper right-hand corner. That's just to give you an idea. I think another way of creating just a shared copy is to, if you hold down, let's say the Alt and maybe Shift, but there's modifier keys where you could do that as well. But, you know, just hit Control or Option plus K and then just check the shared copies. And then you should just be able to have all those duplicated parts. Okay. Hello, Greg. So my first question, is there any way to ease making a voicing chord for orchestra? For example, making a first violin legato of the 5th, the second violin for the 3rd, etc. You know, so one of the things that you could do if you wanted to, you know, come over here, let's say if I have, you know, so let's say I just have like a string patch, and let's say on this particular song, I'm gonna have just a chord voice, like let's say I have chords from this piano part, which is kind of the basis. I'm gonna go to the project menu, and I'm gonna go to the chord track, and I say create chord symbols. And now that we have the chord symbols, we could go to what we call chord pads. And I could actually assign the chord pads from the chord track. So we will just come right over here. And now, as I play these particular pitches, I could trigger the chord pads from, you know, let's say I choose my string part. So now I could just come over here and be able to And I'll just set this input from the chord pad. So now, as I just come here, we could just kind of play directly from the chord pads. So let's say, just take this. So I'll show you another example here real quick. So if you don't know how to do kind of orchestration, and the best part is sometimes just figuring it out and working it, if you have the capability of doing that, but sometimes we realize that you may not. So as soon as I go to, let's say, chord pads here, I could just say, okay, we're going to take this piano, and once I'm in this range, but if I had this set for strings, I could just go. And you could have these. We could have different players. So I could say, let's just have playing chords. And this could automatically do kind of the orchestration for you depending upon the patch. But sometimes, just manually playing in stuff, or, something else we could do is, let's say if I wanted to take a different string voice here, let's add just a quick chords, and one of the great things is if you have the scale assistant in Cubase 11, I'll come over here. So now I could just kind of play. So I'm just playing like, one particular MIDI note. And since I'm in the chord range, it will just take that. But if I have come over here and say, okay, I'm in the key of E major within the scale. If you wanted to figure out if you're not so comfortable with music theory, you can say, okay, I'm in the key of E major. At this point we could say snap pitch editing, but we could say, okay, I'm here and I wanted to draw this note in, and as we just come over here we could choose to only snap live input or show scale note guide. So at this point we could say, okay, I could only just come over here if we wanted to only snap to the particular scale, so you could quantize pitches. So here if you wanted to move it to different chords, you could automatically keep it within the scale right here. So a lot of people use kind of the scale editing. So now once I enable snap pitch editing, I can't move it to a note that's out of key. So that's something that a lot of people will do in kind of doing quick orchestrations as well. All right, so we have Daryl from Oakland checking in, and Brian from North Carolina, Mildred Brown from Pennsylvania. Okay, so just see a question from Christian D68. So it just says, hello, Greg. When I click on the Cubase icon on the desktop, nothing happens. I've launched a little e-licenser control center and made the synchronization, but it doesn't help. So, one of the things that you could try is, if it's on the desktop, maybe, I'm not sure if you're on Mac or Windows, but if you just come right over here, a lot of times you could open directly from here, but try also right clicking and say run as administrator. So maybe the administrator rights have gotten changed somehow. So see if you could Just if you have the admin purposes, maybe if you share your computer with someone else, like a family member that, perhaps it's under their administration rights. So check to make sure, like, just right click and see if you could run as administrator. Also, Christian, if you could let me know if you're seeing the license directly in the e-licenser control panel, that information would be helpful to know too. Okay, so I see Christian D68 win and after updates. Sometimes after a Windows update, just reinstalling the eLicenser Control Center. So if you want to go to elicenser.net, make sure that you actually download and reinstall the latest patch. Sometimes Windows updates can affect the eLicenser, and it's just a simple reinstall of the eLicenser. All right, so we have Jameson from Montreal. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so we have a question. How do I make something stationary at the top of the track so it doesn't move when I scroll down? So if I want it to have a particular, let's say maybe a lead vocal to always be at the top. So there's a divide track list function. So when you come over here, you could see this little, and it's pretty subtle, but you'll see this little drop down menu here. And what you could do is you'll see this little, almost like a slash. And that would allow you to do a divide track list. Now we have kind of an upper and a lower zone. If I drag my piano up, or let's say my lead vocal part, and let's say I drag it to the top here. Now, as I scroll up and down, that lead vocal in the upper zone will always stay fixed. And to get rid of that, you want to go directly below the divided track list. And you could click here and disable the divided track list, or enable. Again, just by clicking, you'll see this right below the little arrow. Click there, and then you could drag to the top, and as you scroll up and down, that particular track will stay locked in that particular position. So a lot of people may put chord tracks, a vocal, tempo, time signature track, that information in that area. But you can put any track you want. Okay, we have a question. Hey, Greg, is it possible to duplicate an audio event and put the original copy in musical mode without putting the duplicate in musical mode? Okay, so I think that we would have to, the musical mode is going to be based on the actual audio track itself. So let's say if I come here and let's say I want this in musical mode, but I copied it. But I don't want this one in musical mode. So what you're probably going to have to do, because musical mode is determined not by the event itself, but by the actual audio file. So if I come here, I think if I put this into musical mode, that since it's the same file, it will automatically share that characteristic. So a quick way to get around that is we could just turn this into a new audio file, and we could do that by going to audio to bounce selection. You'll get prompted if you want to replace events, and if we say yes, at this point this will be a new audio file. So I could have this I could have this one in musical mode, and this one I could take to not be in musical mode, and you could just have different behavior even though they're the same audio files. You still have the original file intact, but try to just select the range and go to audio to bounce selection, and then you could have independent musical modes or not. Okay, so we have a question from Justin. Hi, Greg. Thanks for these. I have a little glitch. Whenever I select a sampler track, it takes my whole project window out of Maximize and moves it down to the left slightly. Okay, so let's say I will just add a quick sampler track. Okay, I'm going to activate the project first. Sorry about that. Okay, so now I have the sampler track. So it takes up my whole project out of Maximize and I move it down to the left slightly. So, all right, so let's say if I'm here and I go to my sampler track, so it hasn't affected my window at all. I wonder if it's perhaps, make sure if you come over here and you would do it on the upper right-hand side on a Windows platform, but maybe if you just maximize the particular, let's say if I come here, so I wonder if your window state, if it's set to, so let's say if I'm here with my sampler track, I come over here, I maximize it, and I'll select the sampler track. So also, if you have this working on a separate window, let us know if you get the same behavior, if the sampler track is in its own floating window, or if it's only when it's in the lower zone. But it seems to be consistent on my system, and I haven't noticed it on my PC system in my studio that I use either. And I also see, Justin, you're saying that, and maybe if someone else has this issue, but if it's also, he's using multiple windows, so I'm not sure if it's multiple monitors. All right, so we have a question, how to export MIDI files. So all you have to do to export a MIDI file is come over here, go to File, to Export MIDI File. At this point, you could come over here and you could give it a name. You can have different options. So if you wanted to export automation, that could be like MIDI CC data. If you want to export inserts, where like, MIDI plugins, or the same with sends, you could choose to export markers as part of the MIDI file. You also have export as type 0. And this is going to be more useful for, could be a requirement if you're exporting it to maybe a hardware sequencer. You could export based on the locator range, or if you wanted to include delay and give it a name. But once again, just go to your file menu to export to audio mixdown. Or not to audio mixdown, but export MIDI file. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so I just see from JK Beats how this can apply to Vari Audio. So let me see if it's, maybe I missed the first part of the question. Okay. So maybe, let us know, JK Beats, if you want me to show you how to use Vari Audio. But I'm not sure like how this can apply to Vari Audio, and I'm not sure if it's maybe with the tuning, or maybe with the chords. So, but let me know if I'm going down the complete wrong path. But if I've determined my chord progression from like a MIDI part here, so let's say I go to my chord track and we'll create chord symbols, and I go into my Vari Audio editor. We can choose different color schemes. So you say we could assign colors, and I could assign the colors based on the chord track. So here I have a red note and a red segment. We'll call these segments. Will indicate that that's out of key. This kind of aqua colored would indicate that the colors are going to be in the key, and the green notes are within the scale. If you see a bright blue note, that could be within the chord but out of the scale. So, but that's how the colors can be applied. But let me know, JK Beats, if I completely misunderstood that. Okay, so we just see how can I place a question. So once again, you could just ask in the chat field where you just ask that question, or you could submit them in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, we have a question. How can we use third-party MIDI effects? Like to lock into a scale and record in real time possible. So I don't know if they're, the MIDI effects are kind of not open source. There's no third-party MIDI effects to that. But if you wanted to record in particular keys, so let's say I wanted to just record in a particular key, I could choose, let's say, and let's say I'm a horrible keyboard player, which fortunately I am. But if we go to, let's say, a MIDI editor part, we can go to the scale assistant, and we could choose to snap live input. So let's say if I just wanted to come here, select all my notes, and I wanted it to be in the key of G major. So now as I record in, and I'll just go ahead and record directly into the editor here in Solo. So once we have snap live input, at this point I could just play. And when I go to hit an F, so it will go through now and just kind of snap all of my input directly to that particular scale. So just come over here, go to the scale assistant, and you could say either use a chord track or use the editor scale, set the key right here, and you have a number of different scales, and say snap live input, and then it won't allow, it'll take any note that's out of key directly into the key that you defined here. So you don't need any third-party plugins for that. All right, great to have Matt from London on the live stream. Okay, so we have a question from Bill. Is there a way to change the BPM of a session and make it so a MIDI event doesn't follow tempo changes? Okay, so let's come over here. Okay, so let's say I want to make a quick MIDI track from my kick drum here. So I'm going to just go ahead and create MIDI notes. So that I'll have a MIDI part. All right, so I have MIDI data here. So if I wanted to change the tempo of all of my files, but not have it changed. So let's say my BPM is at 100 BPM for this project. So I'll come over here And so I have MIDI going out to a virtual instrument track here, Groove Agent, which is basically playing the drums. So if I change my tempo for the project, I can say I want this to be 120 beats a minute. All my tracks will follow. But if we don't want the MIDI to follow, all we have to do is select the track and place it into linear mode. So we can see this little eighth note or quarter note indicated right here. So I want it so that it looks like a clock. And now that I changed the tempo, we could hear that the audio has sped up, but the MIDI is now playing at the original time. But if I just switch this MIDI track to be in musical mode as opposed to linear mode, and we do this at the track level, you could just come right over there and adjust. So let's say I want 120. But so if you don't want the MIDI to follow, all you have to do is to select the track, not necessarily the event, but the track, and place it into linear mode right here in the inspector. So the top inspector tab. Okay. All right, great to see Tom Morello checking in from Philadelphia. Okay. All right, so we have a question. Please, sir, is there any auto-tune for Cubase or only third-party? If one, can I find to use it? So, yeah, there's going to be kind of tuning capabilities. There's two different modes. So if I wanted to jump back to this project, there's one. So if you wanted to just kind of like a really quick, setting, you could come right over here to Inserts, and you could go to under Pitch Shift. There's going to be Pitch Correct, and we can say, okay, I want to do an external MIDI scale, or let's say I just wanted to be able to set my scale. So let's say, okay, I want it to be G major, and we could adjust the speed, and you could do tuning just like that. So if you want to just like a quick turn something on, you could do tuning just that easily with the Pitch Correct plugin. If you have Cubase Artist or Cubase Pro or Nuendo, you could double click, go into the sample editor, and just like we showed a bit earlier, you could click on the Very Audio tab, go to Edit Very Audio, and now you could graphically edit your pitch and be able to get into at a very granular level. Okay, I wanted to take this and just adjust the vibrato and be able to do a number of different kind of graphic editing base. But both of those methods of working are part of Cubase without having to use any third-party programs. Okay, so you just see from Jeff Sabelski, hi Greg, Cubase 10.5 Pro is fine. Cubase 11 Pro Nuendo crashes on opening of Chord Pad loading every time. Unreinstalled both. I have no third-party plugins, only older projects. Do I need to send Cubase help the DMP file? So you could always, send them like your crash dumps, or if you want to reach out to me if you want to send, and I thought you saw further down that that you tried all choices with safe mode, tried with no success. So yeah, generally like safe mode will fix that, but it could be perhaps like So usually that would resolve an issue like that. But if you want to send it to support, or if you wanted to, send it to Club Cubase at steinberg.de, I'd be happy to take a look at it as well. Okay, so it says I'm using Cubase 10 Pro on an M1 MacBook Pro, and there is monitoring latency, as in the meters don't match the actual audio output. So I don't think Cubase 10 was designed for M1 Mac, so I'm not sure if that is compatible. I know that Cubase 11 is the first one that's kind of officially supported on the M1. So, since the Cubase 10 Pro came out 2 years before the M1 was released. So you might have to download try a trial version of Cubase 11 and see, but I don't think that Cubase 10 Pro is going to be compatible with an M1 MacBook Pro. There's pretty significant architectural updates software-wise for that. So you may want to look, perhaps try a Cubase 11 version. So I'm not sure. Sometimes, they don't go back to versions 2 or 3 years ago to for compatibility with major architectural changes. So you may have to upgrade. And there is currently, in the month of July, the Cubase Studio Weeks promotion. So, there are discounts and a promotion going on that could make upgrading even easier. So, all right. So we have Matthew checking in from Raleigh. All right. Okay, so we have a question from JK Beats regarding spectral layers included with Cubase Artist 11. It appears gray and inactive when it comes to use it inside of Cubase. I can't do any modifications, but outside of Cubase, I can use it normally. So generally, when we go to the audio to extensions, if nothing is selected, so if I don't have an audio event selected and I go to my extensions, I'll see that Spectral Layers is inactive because there's nothing that I could do a Spectral Layers edit on. If I select an audio event, now I can see that the extensions becomes active. So make sure that you have something actually selected that Spectral Layers can be applied to, and I think that will solve the problem. Okay, so we have a question. Please, how can one add delay to a particular section in a vocal without affecting all of the vocal bar? So, one way is just to do like a quick automation. But let's say if I just wanted to, we could also do something called direct offline processing. So let's say I want to take this vocal phrase. So let's say just where she had said a lie. So let's go ahead and just kind of zoom in here. So I'm just going to select that phrase with the range tool. So you could just use the range tool. If you go to your audio and go to plugins, I could just say, let's come over here. I want to do a mono delay, and I wanted to make it a dotted eighth note. So now at this point, it's applied that delay to just that section of the audio file. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is if we just go to your sends and let's add an effect send directly to just a part. So let's go to our delay. All right, and let's say I want it to be a quarter note delay. And then you could just choose to automate the send if you wanted to. But probably the easiest way is just to select the region that you want. And you will have a tail size that you could add in milliseconds so that it doesn't cut off. But anytime that you would just select the particular event, you could come right over here and just delete that afterwards. So try just to select it, go to audio, to plugins, choose a plugin, and just select the range that you want to be applied to. And then all you have to do is just come right over there, and that will apply a delay only in that particular selection. Excuse me. All right. Sorry, just lost my space. I coughed and my timeline jumped on me. Okay, so we have a question. Okay, so this is from Yadin from Israel, I believe. I save a project which I'm working on. After I close it and open it again, it says I cannot find the location. Is there a way to fix it? All right, so a lot of times people, so check to make sure that your project, sometimes when I get these types of questions, it could be that maybe there's multiple. So one is make sure that your project is set into its own unique folder to start with. So if I wanted to, take a look, so when starting a project, you'll go to new project, and I think since version 11, it'll always default to prompt for project location. So you want each project into its own folder. So that way it'll create subsets for the audio files and other, an edit history if needed in a particular file in that project. So a lot of times people may come over here and have multiple projects in the same folder. So, when you do a save, you can check just to make sure, what folder that project is in. So let's say if I wanted to go here, I should have kind of one, let's say if I go to my projects here. So I will come over here to this project, and at this point, make sure that you only have that particular project in there. So I have some other ones in here. I'll show you just so when I come here to Amos Moses, this project, all of my projects, this is where all of these project saves will go to. So sometimes if people do a save as, they may save it into a different folder. So, if you're doing save, we'll save the current project in its location. If you do a save as and you accidentally selected a different folder, maybe the last time you saved as, the operating system will take you to the same folder. So make sure that when you go look into your project folder, that project that you're trying to open is, in the same folder. So, make sure, and if you are have fallen victim to this of having multiple projects within one particular folder, try going, and you could alleviate this by going to the backup project. You can select a brand new empty folder, and that will move all the different files from that. But go to your Finder or Explorer and just look and make sure that that project file is in the project folder. All right, so we have a question from Matthew. I work with big templates for scoring when trying to swap between projects. Usually there's an issue with reloading all the samples again. Is there a better way to do that besides using VEP? So a lot of times when you do that, so what many people will do is, there's people sometimes would do like a really large template and have to load up like, gigabytes and gigabytes of samples that they're probably not using. So what a lot of people tend to do now, what I find is they have their template, but they come over here and they just right click and all the tracks are disabled until they're actually used. So, you may have like a 1400 track template, and when you go to use the sound, all you have to do is right click and say enable track, and then that instrument is available. So that doesn't take that's not taking up your computer's processing. It's not taking up the computer's memory. But, if you start with your template with everything disabled and then enable it, you could, load your projects and reload projects much faster. So that's a method that a lot of composers are kind of migrating to, as opposed to having like, farms of, Vienna Pro machines with all their samples. So, I was just talking a couple weeks ago with Alan Silvestri, wonderful composer, Forrest Gump and Back to the Future, and and many countless other amazing films. And that's what he does a lot of times. And he will even just import track archives for particular instruments that he has saved up. But many people now are just disabling tracks, and that way it could load up much faster. Okay, so we have when I import a MIDI file, it creates tracks that I can't assign instruments to. The MIDI info is there, but I can't change the instruments. It's like the tracks are disabled. What am I missing? So it could depend on the status of a preference. So when you go to your preferences, go to MIDI file, and we could say destination. So by default, this will load up like a Hallian Sonic SE multi-timbral. So if we import a MIDI file, it will load up sounds with Hallian Sonic SE multi-timbral. You could also just have it load up MIDI tracks and instrument tracks. So a lot of people will get this, and it's a common question I get is like, oh, it's assigned to Hallian Sonic SE, or I can't assign, and I can't switch it to a different instrument. So again, just change the destination under MIDI preferences, MIDI to MIDI files. But you could just come over here to the VST instrument itself, if you have that, and just choose to, when you come here, just choose no VST instrument, and then each of those tracks can be assigned freely. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to change the location of a channel in the main project zone without dragging it with the mouse? Maybe a keyboard shortcut? Thanks. Okay, so let's come over here. I'll do new project. Okay, so I think what they want to do is to come over here and like move this track all the way up to the top, and without having to drag constantly. All right, so I think I thought I saw a keyboard shortcut. Let me see if I can find it quickly. That might help with this. Look one more place else, but there's another method that we could use sometimes. Oh, sorry. Let me just try it one more time. Okay, so what I've seen some people do in this scenario is, and you can make a macro to do this, is let's say if I want to move track 24 to the top, is to have both of those tracks selected. You can come over here to track visibility agents and say show only selected tracks, move that up, and then show all tracks. So that's one way that people I know can do it kind of, and you could, initiate that through macros and keyboard shortcuts. So, but you had to kind of select it too. So if you don't want to drag for a large project, you can select the track that you want to be around, that you want it to be, around, and select the track that you want to move. Go to your configuration agents, show only selected tracks, move it, and then show all tracks. So if you have 3,000 tracks, that can make a big difference and kind of speed stuff up again. All right, so great to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas on the live stream. All right, so just see, hi Greg, can you drag a MIDI clip from the project window into the File Explorer window? Maybe you could ask the development team to do this. It's done in Studio One. So, and this from Frank. So do you want it to export a MIDI file automatically, or do you want it to export a MIDI loop? Do you want it to create an audio file? So let's say if I have an instrument track here, I'll just give it a shot. So that just made a MIDI file, just dragging it directly to the desktop from the event. It just made a MIDI file. So let me know if you wanted that to do something differently, Frank. All right, so the ice cream dispensing has begun for Michael Teens. Thank you. All right, so I see from Nick. Hi, Greg. Just emailed you a question before the stream. So I'll probably get to it later. Let me see if I could switch my windows over here to get to it. All right, so Nick's question. So we have from Nick, I was having an issue with command I set up in generic remote. I assigned a command on my touch screen to MIDI channel 1, CC10, to trigger thin out CC info. It's doing the command, but it's also triggering pan info, which I understand why, because 10 is pan CC. Is there a way to avoid this? I didn't realize that generic remote, I had to stay away from known CC commands. So let's take a look and so it could be that your controller is let's take a look at this. I'll set up just a quick generic remote. Okay, so let's say MIDI channel 1. I want, I'll just learn this. So I want controller 1, my mod wheel to come here to command, and let's have it add track. All right, so say we'll have it add a ruler track. Okay, so I do that. But let's see. I'm going to just change the MIDI channel on it. Okay, so once again, I do this. So I think what it's going to do, so it could be, so let's say we have MIDI channel to add track to flute. So if this is outputting MIDI channel 2, all right, let me make sure I have that set up correctly. And I'll just add a quick MIDI track here. All right, so I will reassign this. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's say I'm in MIDI channel 1. I'm going to apply that. So now I move my mod wheel. It's going to do that particular function. And I want to just go to my MIDI insert. And I'll just go to my MIDI monitor. So as you can see that it's kind of not even allowing me to take that particular channel for that. So let's say if I go to this is on a different MIDI channel. So that's automatically once you have it defined as a generic remote, it's going to kind of take over that. So I'm just going to make sure before it could actually be, presented to, like, do other CCs. So I'll just reread it again. So I assigned a command on my touch screen to MIDI channel 1 CC10 to trigger thin out CC data. It's doing a command, but it's also triggering pan info, which I understand why, because 10 is pan CC. Is there any way to avoid this? So it doesn't even look like it's getting to this. So I'm not sure if you set the same thing from your controller. So I'm not sure if it's your touchscreen that's maybe sending perhaps multiple MIDI information. But when I come here and I go to my MIDI inserts and I have this set to MIDI monitor. So if I play notes, we see all these. If I move sliders, these will kind of all show up here. But as soon as I clear this, so let's say we'll come here and turn it on, that it seems on my end to automatically just take control of that parameter before it is assigned here. So it seems to not be doing both. So check your MIDI monitor status, Nick, and see if you're seeing it there. But maybe the device itself is transmitting on multiple ports. So it could be something like that as well, like with a touchscreen controller, that it's, maybe multi-port. So let us know if that is kind of the case. All right, great to see Soren from Sweden on the live stream. Thanks for joining us, and Michael Pierce as well. Reading through comments. So you see Justin is only weird when he's using a sampler track with his display, and he's made a keyboard shortcut, to maximize the window, but I didn't really see that on my settings, but I could do some more research if you want to email me. All right, so we have John from South Wales in UK joining us. All right, so I just see, Greg, it's elicenser.net. So it's elicenser with S-E-R, I believe. So let's just come here. I'll show this. This is for Christian D68. So just a quick way of doing that. So I'll just come here. Let's go to elicenser. So I believe it ends with a S-E-R and not a C-E-R. So if you just come elicenser, and if you check the spelling here, E-L-I-C-E-N-S-E-R as opposed to C-E-R at the end, that should get you there. Jazz Dude has a little statement of wisdom: the older the user, the bigger the monitor should be for your display monitors, I assume. So I just see, how do I stop a pre-roll MIDI bar being recorded? So, I think a lot of times by default, Cubase will, so Cubase will allow you to, capture anything. So if I just had some MIDI notes that I hit here, that I could hit the retrospective record, and that could just automatically show up here. But one of the things that Cubase could do, in a preference that may help with this, is if we go to your preferences, let's go to editing. It might be under editing MIDI. Let me just, or under record MIDI. So try to set, you'll see under preferences, record MIDI. Try set the snap MIDI parts to bars. So you could try to disable that. So if you have like a little pickup note, it may record before that. So try doing the snap MIDI parts to bars, and maybe just disable that, and that should allow you to record exactly where you actually had placed the MIDI data without extending the previous measure. Okay, so we say, hi, could you create a synth from a random sound, please? Okay, so I'll just randomly pick a sound. All right, so let's say I have some. Okay, so let's say I want to take that. We could create a sampler track. So let's say I'll just take this. All right, maybe I want this only to play like this particular part here. Okay, so I could, let's adjust filters. So, and you have a number of different filter choices. And we could choose to so if I wanted to just kind of come over here and apply different resonant filters. All right, and we'll click on the modulation. We could kind of change the phase if we wanted this to. So, but you could, do stuff like that. And if you wanted to even get inside of, so doing it from a sample, you could do stuff like that if you wanted to. And be able to assign it to different LFOs. So, different. So, you could do all sorts of stuff with that. So let's say if I just want to take like maybe a bass sound. Or I think I have a good example I could use. Even just like a quick synth sound, I could drag it in. Let's normalize it and run it through filters. So all sorts of fun stuff you can do with the sampler track. So we have a question: does Cubase have a training course? So there's hundreds and hundreds of videos. So it's not necessarily laid out in a course. There are companies that in schools that have certified Cubase trainers, but you could probably just very easily watch a lot of the. Hopefully, I think a lot of people have learned a lot from watching the Club Cubase live streams here. So you could do that, but check out the Cubase YouTube channel. Check out the Cubase Nation Discord. All right, Michael Teams wants everyone to whack the like button. So that's always a good thing, and hitting the like button will allow us to continue to do these live streams. One quick announcement for next Tuesday: I have to do my first business trip in 18 months almost. So I won't be doing the live stream next Tuesday, so I'll have that off, but we'll do the following Friday. So once again, on the 27th of July, there won't be a live stream, so I have to go to Los Angeles for a couple days. But we should be back on our normal schedule after that. Okay, so a question from Jeff Zabelski. Older project coming along, mapping trills, articulations going well using 3 Halion Sonic VSTIs, 2 perfect to third stops, MM331 every time, no sound, then something in, I guess, measure 33 triggers it on and off again, measure 30 or MM 331. So if you're finding that something is off, this is kind of a good time to maybe look in the list editor. So let's say if I was looking at something of this nature, like I would make sure that when we go to you may not see it so much in like a typical piano roll editor, but if you go to your list editor, this could actually show you all information. So if it's a articulation that's maybe, or there's, maybe a MIDI CC message, you could come over here and take a look into the list editor. And that's often when I'm playing back a sequence and something weird's going on, I don't see what it is. This will kind of allow you to view that particular track at kind of a very detailed, microscopic or granular level. So check that out. Okay, reading through comments. All right. I just lost my space. Let me just find it again. All right. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so I think I'm back to where I was. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have a question. Hey, Greg, is there a way to record engaged from a generic remote that does not have transport control buttons? Yeah, so as long as it's anything that spits out MIDI messages, you can do quite easily. So if you wanted to, let's say I wanted to set up a C note on my keyboard here. And I wanted that to record enable. So go over here to your device setup, and you could go to generic remote. And once we have a generic remote, at that point, I could say I want this particular function. And all you have to do is click on the learn, and hit the parameter on your controller keyboard. So I'm going to hit a MIDI note, like a C note up high. So we'll say C, that note. So it captured that note. And what I want to do is to go to transport. We'll go to device, and I'll just say, record. Right, so I'll just come here. So you could even type it in there. So now as I'm playing along, I hit that note message. And now my Cubase will just go into record. So it could be anything. So if your keyboard controller doesn't have, particular functions, if it has knobs, it doesn't have a transport, you wanted to assign a button on it, just again go to the generic remote. All right, capture the MIDI note, the MIDI message that you want, whether it's a note, a button on your controller, and then go to transport, device, and record. And then you could have that, that button just engage record without having to have a physical transport. So as long as it has some knobs or buttons on it. All right, so I see from Jeff Sabelski, just a continuation of his previous questions. I've checked all input articulations and score, like double slurs, etc. Nothing helps the sound re-trigger sound. So if you want to email the project to me, Jeff, so if it's using like HSO and Iconica, you could email the project to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I should be able to open it up on my end, and I could take a look at it for you. All right, so Michael Teams has granted me 3 scoops of Rocky Road ice cream, so I appreciate that. Be good for my throat in about 3 hours. All right, so a question from Michael. Is there a declipper/denoiser stock plugin in Cubase Pro 11? So there isn't a standard declicker or denoiser plugins. If you have Wavelab, there are kind of standard plugins, but Cubase doesn't have any audio restoration buttons. All right, so our question from Jeff Sabelski. Once articulations are input and score, does the track still need an expression map loaded, or do they still trigger the articulations and score playback? Thanks very much. So it will need the expression map loaded so that when the score plays back, it sends that MIDI key message. It will send a MIDI, like the expression message, whether it's to do a key switch or for the different articulations, and Cubase needs to know how to do that. So make sure that you do have the expression map loaded up, Jeff. All right, great to see Randy Lee in the live stream. Okay, so we have a question from Bob Hoke. If I upgrade to Cubase Pro 11, will projects I work on be compatible with another studio that uses Cubase 10? So unless you're using, for the most part, as long as it's playing back audio and MIDI and plugins are the same, if you're specifically doing new functions in Cubase 11 that aren't in Cubase 10.5, then some of those functions may not translate over. But for the most part, loading up kind of a project and having it play back between Cubase 11 and Cubase 10, depending on which functionality you're using, won't be a problem for you. Okay, reading through comments. All right. All right. So we see from Lewis Knudsen. Hey, Greg, I'm in Cubase 11 Pro, Windows 10. I have a project that keeps crashing Cubase in the middle of exporting. During export, Task Manager doesn't show heavy load on CPU or RAM. Any guesses? So a lot of times when I hear that, it's going to be maybe a plugin that's causing it. So if out of curiosity, if you could, when you do the export audio mix down, and you choose to do it in real time, so you'll see a real time export option. So at that point, you may find that, okay, when it gets to this point in the song is where it crashes. At that point, you may say, okay, this track comes in at this time and it's using this plugin. So I think that if you do that, you could find it's going to be related to a particular plugin being utilized in one portion of the project. So sometimes some plugins can play back fine, and when you export them, they don't behave as well. So. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to show only groups in the mix console? Okay, so let me load up a big project here. Okay, so you can filter out different track types in the mix console in the views. So we'll show you how to do that. We'll get this project loaded up. It has lots of views or lots of tracks. Okay, so let's go to maybe like our... All right, so if I only want to see group channels, what you could do is you could come over here to like visibility agents. And now I could only see my group channels. And if I want to see audio, instrument, sampler, MIDI, effects, VCAs, rewire, or output channels, input channels. So you could come right over here and again, you could access this from this little icon just to the left of where my transport is, and then just show only group channels. Now, if you wanted to have a mix console, because you can have 3 different mix consoles open. So I can say this mix console, I only want to see my group channels. So I could have that be independent. So say I go to Mix Console 1, I can see all of my channels in the project. And I go to Mix Console 2, I could only see group channels. So once again, just kind of come right here to this little icon to the left, and you could filter out different types of tracks in the Mix Console view. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. If you learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. So I just see any recommendations for a motherboard and chipset for Cubase Pro 11. So it's kind of hard for us at Steinberg to recommend particular motherboards because we don't get them all. You know, it's not like the companies send us their motherboards for our evaluation. I just recently got an Asus Prime motherboard, I have the little book here, a Z590P, and that's been working really well for me. But I know Jazz Dude has done a lot of configurations. He does a lot of Ryzen motherboards. But you could check with, perhaps different people are doing building of, audio PCs. And perhaps other people can share their experiences with their motherboards. I know Jazz Dude's done a lot of configurations for people. Okay, so we see from Christian D68, I have imported a video and fixed all cycle markers to different scenes. Tempo's at 143 for the moment. If I change the cycle markers, lose their original place, what can I do to fix the markers to the time code independently from the tempo? So I think I understand the question. So let's go ahead and let me open up project here. Okay, so let's say if we have a bunch of markers and the markers we want to be set to specific like SMPTE time codes. So I will come here, let's just set this to our time code position. And let's say I have my markers here. And I'll just go ahead and import, I'll just do some cycle markers as well. So I'll come to my marker track and let's add a cycle marker. All right. And we'll add another cycle marker. All right. So now when we go to the markers track themselves, let's come over here and go to the track control settings. There's a toggle. So I'm going to just right click. Let's go to the markers here. Right click on the marker track, go to track control settings. You'll see toggle time base, add. So we want to add that. So now it's in musical mode. So if I change the tempo, and let me just move our time code marker here. All right, so marker 5 is at All right, so marker 5 is at 22. Let me just... Okay, so marker 5 is roughly at 22 seconds, 6 frames. Okay, so now... since this is in musical mode, when I adjust the markers and I slow down the tempo, that time position is now changed significantly. So let's say I go back to wherever I was. Okay, so now we're at 22,240. So what I want to do is to take this marker track, instead of it being in musical mode, put it into linear mode. Now that marker will stay at that time code position when I adjust the tempo. So let's say I go back to marker 5 is going to be at the same time code position regardless of whatever my tempo is. So you want to take the markers when working with video, go to your track control settings and just put it, toggle time base. If it's in the hidden controls, put it into the visible, and then you could just place your marker track into linear mode right there. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. If you learned something new, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. All right, wonderful to see Gant Kushner on the live stream. Wonderful audio engineer. I was talking to Greg Lukens last week. I think he said you were over doing some work with him recently. All right, so we have a question from Gant. Often when I instantiate a plugin and an insert, when a plugin gets done installing itself, the insert rack closes itself and the EQ rack pops open. Can I make it stop? So let me just jump back to another project. Activate this one. Okay, so let's say we'll go to this track here. So often when I instantiate a plugin and insert, when the plugin gets done loading itself, the insert rack closes. So let's say so what you could do, Gant, is let's say, okay, I'll come over here to my dynamics. Let's say I go to the compressor. So try right-clicking on if you're starting it from this point, try right-clicking on the channel setting. So let's say if I jump here and I go to instantiate a plugin. So let's say, okay, I want that. So see if you have always on top disabled. But as you can see, so I'm not sure if you're just reread it again. So the rack closes itself and the EQ rack pops open. Can I make it stop? So, and it could be one other preference. When you get to VST to plugins. So check to see if you have Open Effect Editor after loading it. So let's say if I come and I'll just open up another plugin. So check that preference as well, Gant. So go to your Cubase, your edit menu on your Windows, go to Preferences, and see if Open Effect Editor after loading it is checked. And that may help you with that. But as you can see, when I go to instantiate a plugin, that it doesn't affect this. But you could also try right-clicking near the top and see if this is always on top, depending on how your windows are are set up as well, just on the channel strip. So give that a try, Gant. Let us know how it works. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Is there a way that we can create a shortcut, or if it already exists, where by pressing the enter, the cursor will go back to the beginning of the session, kind of like it works in Pro Tools? So if you have a, on your numeric keyboard, all you have to do is, on your numeric keyboard on the side, so you hit 0, that's stop. If you hit enter, that's play. If you hit the period key between them, that'll take you right back to the beginning of the session. So, you have plus is fast forward, minus rewind, play is enter, 0 is stop. And then if you want to go back to beginning, hit the period on a numeric keypad. Now it'll take you to the beginning of the project. And if you wanted to reassign that, hitting the enter key could be dangerous for a lot of things. But we'll find the keyboard shortcut for that if you wanted to. So I'll just come over here. So you go to transport, go to project start. So, and that's just the numeric keypad, hit the period key. And I think once you kind of get those under muscle memory, that it's really fast. All right, so Jazz Dude's always, says if you have a Steinberg USB e-licenser, why not try Nuendo 11 for 60 days? Because you could use a trial version. I just see Matthew saying, because I'm afraid of Nuendo, and says I'm just scared of change. So it's really, if you know how to run Cubase, it's pretty much everything's in Nuendo. So. All right, so you see Zofo just got artist, but seen enough, and now he's going to upgrade to Cubase Pro before the sale ends. So yeah, if you want to take advantage of discounts, make sure, I think it's basically 40% discounts on updates and upgrades, so make sure you take advantage of that in July. You can save some money. All right, so we see Leon checking in from the UK. So you just see totally off topic, but will Action Strings 2 ever go on sale? So yeah, I'm not sure if I don't think it's a Steinberg product, so you can maybe check with that company, see if they have a live stream. All right. Reading through comments, so lots of great discussion. Okay, so we see Greg, can you save the sampler tracks? Let me just. All right, let me find my spot. Sorry about that. Okay, so I think I'm going to back to her. sorry, just thought I had my spot, but let me just go back. Okay, so here we are from Kai's question. Greg, can you save those sampler tracks to use in other projects? I think you should just be able to import the sampler track into another project, just like any other track. So yeah, when you go to the sampler track, so let's say I have my sampler track here, and I just wanted to take just a little bit of audio into it. All you have to do is you see preset name, and these just are stored as track presets. So you can call the track preset up and use it into any other project. So once again, you see the sampler track kind of right here. You'll just see the preset management do it as a track preset, and you could call up your sampler configurations into any other tracks as well in other projects. So we have a question, Greg, can conflicts arise when inputting articulations into score editor from the palette and using the expression map lanes to input direction attributes? So if you're doing it from so let's say if I'm looking at this in the score editor, where you can run into issues can be when, if you're doing from the expression map, so you have your kind of dynamics that you could input. You could also put in just, different articulations here, but they, so if you're doing it from the expression map area here, I don't have an expression map loaded for this. It should be pretty safe, but it is possible that you maybe, if you've recorded the articulation notes as part of the performance and then added it in, that could cause some issues if you're doing it, multiple times. But for the most part, as long as you're doing from the expression map and maybe not from, other symbols, you should be fine. All right, so we have a question, Greg. Can you move that sampler track into Hallian? So anytime that you create a sampler track, so let's say I just want to take, all right, so let's say I want to take this into my sampler track, and if I wanted to transpose this to Hallian, Groove Agent SE, Pad Shop, Backbone, we'll see these 3 arrows pointing to the right. So this would allow us to migrate that sample directly to these other samplers. So if you want to do more drum editing, or if you want to do more experimental design in Hallian and sound design, or Pad Shop or Backbone, so just click right here, and then you can take everything that's been created in the sampler track directly into Hallian right from there. See, Michael Team says Club Cubase live streams are awesome with 3 exclamation points, maybe 4. Thank you, Michael. Thanks. It's always great to have you on. It's the ice cream that makes it so awesome that's given away. So. All right. So we have a question. Where can we submit future feature requests? If you can, there is a dedicated form, I think, on the Steinberg forums for that, but you could also send them to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. I do a monthly report of all the questions that are submitted, that are asked in the live stream, and I send that to the Cubase product planning team, so they get all of this feedback and they read through all the questions that people ask. But you could submit it through the forums, or if you want to send it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I could be happy to pass it along as well. All right, so Pablo wants people to hit the like button again. All right. right, good to see Raphael from Austria. Okay, so we have a question. Want to know when we create MIDI track why the fader is to 0 and the pan fader is to off. Okay, so when we add a MIDI track, we'll come over here. Let me just do a new project to show this. Okay, so when we add a MIDI track, we can have, and we go to our mix console, we can see that this will be set to MIDI volume 0, and we have our panner basically not engaged. And the reason this is that there's no data. There's, because this is derived from the MIDI CC data. So there's no MIDI CC data in a new MIDI part generally. So you can record MIDI CC data. So let's say if I wanted to just come over here and, if I recorded a part and it had MIDI CC data, this would show you the MIDI CC7, the main volume message, and this is MIDI CC10. So if there's no data when you're starting with a brand new track, there's generally no CC7 data until the track actually starts. So let's say if I go to my MIDI inserts and I go to MIDI controls, at this point, I'll go to MIDI control, and let's say I wanted to go to volume, and I just wanted to type in 64. That, when we hit play now, so, you could have the MIDI volume, but, generally this is reflecting the data that's actually in the part. So let's say, I think if we even come here and just draw in main volume messages, that as we play, we go to the mix console, we'll see that these changes will just kind of automatically, as it's playing, we'll go through and make those changes. So this is reflecting the MIDI CC data that's within the part. So if there's no parts we don't want, and you have your MIDI CC set to 100, we don't want to, when you load the part, to reset the MIDI volume and MIDI pan messages. So it's best to default to have no value, because then the value in the instrument won't change until you specifically enter in that data. So that's why they show up with no data in them. All right, so just got a question from Raphael about, hope you got my email, and I think this is about like the automation. So let's come over here and show this. So let's go. I'll just do a blank project here to start off with. All right, so we had a question on automation. So let's say if I had, I'll just solo this track, and let's say I have this going on. Okay, so let's say I just have this particular drum track. And so the question is about touch automation modes. So this does work differently between the two programs. And when I've had my discussion, so some people, like like how to use the touch automation modes. It's pretty easy inside of Cubase to do. So Cubase and Nuendo work differently in this regard. And when I've had my discussion when this was originally implemented, it was a specific design choice to have it work in the same manner as an SSL console, where the fader would, actually mimic. So let's say if I'm writing automation and I have a default value. So we don't have a value at the end. So when I come here and I have my automation in touch mode, so say we have this set to touch, and I move the value, and let's say if we're automating first, that would help. So I'll just go ahead and automate values. That as I move and I let go of the fader, that fader position sticks just like it would when, as a physical fader would on a console. So it'll stay at that value. And that was the design intention. So, from way back when, and I've had like really extensive discussions with this. Some people want that to immediately go back to its value. And that's not what touch automation is. Touch automation is actually writing the value when the fader is touched. If we want to, just go to, we could say, write to end and turn this on. And now as soon as I touch, it'll write the automation value at the very end of the project. So now if I do it, like I just want to do a quick automation bump, it can go back kind of to that particular value. So if I just come here and let go, it could go back to that particular value, to like the known value. So let's say I'll just make it so we could see it a little easier here. So let's say we have our automation point. So as we work with this and I let go, it'll go back to the original value. That's because it knows what to go back to, because that point of automation is defined. Now, Nuendo works differently, and that's more of a post-production workflow. But this is how, the physical faders of the console work. So that's how the design implementation was done. And, I was there, 15 years ago when they were going through this and making those design decisions. So, I know, in the email you said that it was a bug, but, that's kind of how, the behavior of real analog consoles work. So, but if you wanted to very easily just, do that, just, put in a touch to the end, and then it'll work in that way very easily. So you could just write, to start and to end, and you could just put in your static automation point. And then as you're in touch automation, you could just have it automatically revert right back. So, all right. Thanks for all the great questions. Let's see how we're doing on time. All right, so we're doing well. All right, so we have another question from Gant. I used to have a shortcut for toggling listen on and off for channels. I can't figure out how to create that in Cubase 10.5. All right, so let's come over here to our key commands. And I think just do enable listen. So I'll search for it here. Let me just, or search for listen. All right, so if you just go here under edit to listen, and then you could assign a keyboard shortcut for that. So once again, edit and listen. So give that a try, Gant. Great to see you on the live stream. Wonderful engineer and guitarist. Okay, we have a question. Is it possible to select the next and previous notes in the MIDI piano roll with a hotkey? I don't mean selecting them at the same time, but next, previous without having to click on them. Okay, so let's go ahead and... All right, so say if I come here and I just have different notes. All right, so say those are my notes. So if you just hit so if you have like a note selected, you can come right over here and just use the arrow keys, the left and right arrow keys on your computer keyboard. And then you could select the previous or the next MIDI notes. So left and right arrow keys on your computer keyboard. And I'll just make this larger so it's a little easier to see. So left and right arrows in the key editors, and that will advance you through the different notes. All right, we have a question, Greg. In expression mapping, output mapping section, please cover the channel parameters and demonstrate how the length parameters are realized, making adjustments for tenuto with a staccato. Thanks. Okay, so I'm not sure if it's in the score editor or if it's in the expression maps. So let's take a look. Let me just jump to one with expression map. Okay, so if you wanted to, let's say, go to our horn. Let me just... Okay, so say we have our expression maps here. Okay, so let's go to expression map setup. Let's see if it's in this area. Okay, so let's say, if I wanted to go to... Okay, so I think what this will do, I haven't worked with this much, but you could, let's come to maybe a string patch just to look at. All right, so let's say we want to do spicata here for these notes. my snap. Okay, let's go to our expression map. I haven't really worked with this so much, but let's say for spicata, I wanted to adjust the length here. Let's do 20% so we can maybe hear that. So it seemed like that would change the length of the notes. And something else that you could do, Jeff, in the score editor that a lot of people don't realize is, let's say, if I want to open the score editor, but you can't have like MIDI meanings for notes. Let me see. If you go to like dynamic mapping, you know, so some of the things that you could do, like as you draw in, we just requantize some of these too. So as I would draw in like crescendos, I think with their dynamics mapping that you could come over here and increase and decrease velocities based on the dynamics of the notes on playback. So that's something else you could do as well. So if you go to the dynamics mapping, you say, okay, every time we play a forte, I want that particular dynamics, and you double click and say a forte, I want to increase velocity by 140%. Or you could say send MIDI CC7 or expression or volume or some other controllers as well. So you could change kind of the performance articulations when you use dynamics mapping in the score editor as well. All right, so we have a question. Can you show an example of using the listen feature? Okay. So what the listen will allow you to do is to actually, you know, many times when we work on like an audio, we can solo tracks in the mix console. That's pretty typical, and that would mute all the tracks. So that mutes all of the other tracks. So let's say if I'm here and we're playing a project, and I'll just make it a little louder here. So let's say, okay, if I go to the bass and solo it, all the other tracks are going to be muted. But at times I may want to just have the other tracks dim in volume. So if I come over here, let's say, and we have a listen dim amount. So at this point, and you can set the dim amount when you click on the main tab in the control room, and you could set how many dB the other tracks will dim. So if I wanted to hear that, so now if I hit L, I could just hear that track kind of louder, but still in context. So we could hear if stuff is clashing. So I just want to listen to the snare and have everything else dim down, and you can set the amount that it dims down by just there. And you can set that key command, as Gant had asked previously, on the edit section. Okay, so just see from Gant. Okay, and since he doesn't get here much, some of my UA plugins pull to one side. Compressors, especially, more compression, more pull. Even on mono instantiations. So, if you, I assume that you're running it on as an insert. So let's say if we have, maybe a stereo track. So let's say if I come here, one thing to check, Gant, when you do this is if you go to, so I would think that it would be the same on both sides, but one thing that might affect it is if we go to your compressor, you can click on the routing tab here, and you could have these set to, being in mono or default to stereo. So check just if the routing on the inserts is maybe not set up correctly. So that's one thing you could check with that Gant to make sure that like inserts are going to be affecting the channel width of the particular channel. I know you said it does it even in mono. One other thing that you may also check is see if you have a difference when you go to the project setup, and check the stereo pan law if that makes a difference as well. So okay, so we just see from Daryl, thanks for the recording gauge on generic remote. Too bad I can't hit the like button twice. Since I can't find Michael Teams, will you send 2 gallons of butter pecan ice cream to Greg? No, it's very generous of you, Daryl. We're just happy that you liked that we got it sorted out for you. Okay, so we have a question. Is there a way to add more than one track at a time to a VCA that is already created? All right, so let's say I have a VCA track here. So I'll just add a VCA track. Okay, so here's my VCA. And let's say if I already have one track that's being sent to the VCA. All right, so I'll just start by adding, let's say I'll add a VCA to this particular track. All right, so I have VCA to my bass, and now I want to send all of these tracks to that VCA. So let me just... All right, so just come over here to the routing. Let me just thought there was some trick to this. I may have my brain cramp on. Okay, I'm gonna activate Q-Link, and let's say try try the direct. See if we can get it under direct routing. So I know I could send these tracks to VCA and then, route the VCA. I think there's some trick. I'm just having kind of a brain cramp. It'll probably come back to me, but if you want to send me an email, I'm pretty sure that there's a way to do it pretty effortlessly, but I'm just having kind of a brain cramp on that. Sorry about that. All right, so we just all right, so okay, so we showed adding the next and previous MIDI notes. Okay, reading, okay. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, while we export stems from multiple tracks and there are both mono and stereo audio channels, so does it export as the audio files or do we have to export mono and stereo separately? So let's say if I'm here and I have mono and stereo tracks, let's imagine I had this. All you'd have to do is when you do, and this came in version 11, we go to your export audio mixdown. When you go to effects, let's say if I come here to effects, I'm going to take all of my audio tracks. If we choose this as dry, the mono tracks would export as mono and the stereo tracks export as stereo. If we do inserts and channel strip, that's going through, so when we choose like our, sends, once we go into the inserts and channel strip, that would then go through the stereo output and would render those as stereo. But if you just choose disable dry, your mono tracks stay mono and your stereo tracks stay stereo. So you don't have to export them independently. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. I think it's from Steve Cummings. Great to see you on the live stream. Having an issue with straightening out tempo on a vocal track. There's just a vocal, no instruments. I use tempo detection with poor results. Any advice on vocal only tempo detection? So if I was, sometimes the vocals aren't going to necessarily come in a downbeat, and you might have to go through and manually do that. So a lot of times tempo detection works very well, but if it's something where, if you have a vocal file, let's say like this one, I think is in 6/8, you might have to manually just kind of go through, and depending, and every vocal could be a little different. But let's say if I'm just, listening to this, I may want to just come right over here and say, okay, this is going to be my downbeat. And you go to the time warp tool and you can say, okay, I just want to now. And I can say, okay, measure 8 will be right here. So, and then you could just Okay, so I'm going to enable my tempo track. And what you could do, you know, if you just have a vocal, is just kind of come here, and what you're doing is moving the grid, and you got to make sure that the track isn't set to musical. And now this is kind of like a manual tempo adjustment. So you say, this is where measure 10 is. Measure 11 starts right here. That sounds like a pickup note. Measure 12 starts here. Measure 13. And you could manually move the bar lines to match. And you can see it kind of underneath. And then you may have to just manually do it with the time warp tool. So, you know, sometimes, you know, vocals aren't enough to get a good sense of what the tempo is because it's not something that's going throughout the song, maybe like, you know, your drum parts or guitar or something like that. So it may not be where someone is singing quarter notes or eighth notes every single time, depending on. So try just to make sure that the event isn't in musical mode, switch to the time warp tool, and then you could just manually make your own tempo map, and it won't take you too long. But you know, that's kind of what the tempo detection tries to do, but you may have to kind of manually do it and realize that, okay, the singer didn't sing for 5 beats here, they didn't sing for 3 beats here. So okay, so in our question, in my cycle marker 1, I have 6.5 measures, but I need 8. In cycle markers 2, I have 3.5 and need 4. Is there a way to say between cycle markers warp measures? Okay, so let me set up scenario here. Just a new project. Okay, and I'll just drop an audio file in. And let me add a marker track. Okay, so let's say we have 6.5 measures for one cycle marker. Okay, so let's say, but he needs 8, and now we need 3.5, but he needs 4 here. Okay, so let's say I have, these are my cycle markers. So we have 6, and I need this to be 8 measures. So let's come over here, and I'm just gonna make measure 8. So my cycle marker, and again, we put this into linear mode, but I take measure 8, and now I have 8 measures in my cycle marker. So let's say now I need this to start at measure 11 for this cycle marker. So I'm going to move measure 11, and I need this to be 4 measures. So again, using the warp tool, you can just come over here and warp the measures to fit the cycle markers, just like that. So once again, make sure you go to the track control settings. That toggle time base is visible. Make sure that you're in linear, and then you could just do tempo changes to make sure that those markers will fit into the same number of measures. So let me know if that works for you, Christian D68. Okay, so we have a question. Do you know of any issues with the scroller? For some reason, when I follow my MIDI, it sort of lags, similar to it having low FPS. Check those settings with no luck. Any ideas? So, just so I'm not sure if it's this scroller that you're working with. Let me just open up kind of a larger MIDI project. Okay, so it's okay, so it's a so let's say if I'm just here. And I'll just put it on follow now. And just put on cycle here. It says zoom. So, I mean, that all kind of seems as expected. If you are on Windows and you have a high DPI, you may want to try going to your Cubase preferences. If you're running like a 4K system for your display monitor, if you on a Windows platform, if you go to General, you could try to toggle enable high DPI and see if that makes a difference. And it could be a display driver that could be causing that. And I also see changing buffer size makes no difference. So yeah, I would check your high DPI settings. All right, so we have a question. I can't use marker track inspectors. I have to close and reopen left zone to see the marker track inspectors. Is there a way to fix it? All right, so let's say if I have marker track here. All right, just so it says I have to close and reopen left zone to see the marker track inspectors. Is there any way to fix it? So, yeah, and this might be like a display card driver issue, but one other thing you could do, I think it's just Control or Command M that could open up your markers in kind of a separate floating window if you don't see that. So if you're having a display issue here, try hitting Control or Command M, and that will open up all your different settings, all the marker settings into a separate floating window, and let me know if you see that. All right, great to see Uno Mementos made it from Finland. All right. Okay, reading through comments. All right. Okay, so I just see, hey, I need help with Cubase. I have kind of a small screen and the sequencer doesn't fit. Is there any way I can remove some tabs to have more sequencer space? So if you go to the upper right-hand corner, this is where you can remove different tabs if you need to change, if you have a smaller screen resolution. So you can come here and remove some of these tabs to get more kind of screen real estate on smaller screens. So upper right hand corner, give that a try right there. And you should be able to kind of resize and move some of the other tabs and zones. All right, so we have a question. How can I set up my project to autosave when or if it crashes? So there is an autosave function. So if you go to your preferences and under general, you'll see kind of your autosave interval. So, when the program, if a plugin, for instance, causes a program to crash, it's not going to crash and then say, oh, let me save for you. So you may not always have that option. So you could just enable your auto save there. So, but it may not, it may not automatically save if the program is crashed from a plugin or something like that. All right, so just see from Gant says, nope, I can't find a listen to selected channel feature. Okay, so let's see if we could, I'll try the keyboard shortcut out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a shot here. See if I can find a keyboard shortcut. All right, found a free one. All right, so let's say if I'm here. So when I hit that keyboard shortcut, that works. So there's my snare. So just hitting that keyboard shortcut, that is engaging the listen function for me. So again, Gant, come over here, and it's going to be edit. I just assigned under edit, listen. And that function will enable the listen bus on the particular channel. Let me know if that doesn't work for you. Okay, so it says, question, I have an issue with Spectral Layers extension. When I pop it up, does it not show any way to resize it? Do you know how to fix it? So let's take a look. So I'll take this. Let's come over here to our Spectral Layers. So I'll get to my audio, to extensions. Try it one more time in a different file. It's locked. Okay, so now I'll take it into its full screen. So if you grab like from the top down, this is what I'm doing, and then kind of resize, that you could choose to kind of size that way. So sometimes if filling the screen, try just to grab from one of the upper corners or one of the corners and then resize. And then that should help with that. Thanks again for all wonderful questions. And once again, just a reminder, next Tuesday, we won't be doing a live stream. I have to go to Los Angeles for a couple meetings. So we will do it on Friday, which will be our last, which will be the last live stream of the month. So we'll do a Zoom meetup. So. All right, so we just see answered my own question. Indirect monitor sends don't work while live. Can they be made to work? So generally, no, because what the direct monitoring is enabling is the input from the incoming audio signal into the converter is going straight to the output. So that's what the direct monitoring is. So it's not going to go through the send. So some people will run at low latencies. And if you want it to, run at low latencies, you could monitor through the effects. And one of the things that you could do is if you go to the audio system itself, you could activate ASIO Guard. And what that will allow you to do is the track that is recording only, the track that you're is used for only recording, that is going to be running at a lower latency, lower buffer size, and the other tracks will run at higher buffer sizes. So that's one way to mitigate it. Some audio interfaces, like the Steinberg UR series, and I think others, will have built-in DSP so that as you're tracking, you will have, imperceptible latency while tracking with effects, but that's going through the hardware DSP on those particular audio interfaces. But, with the direct monitoring, the intention is that the signal is basically bypassing the audio engine internally and is going directly from the input to the output. Some audio interfaces may allow you to route that into effects, but not necessarily through the sends. But a lot of sends, a lot of the effects can be running at low latency or imperceptible latency, so you may not notice, but but once you enable direct monitoring, that's, basically telling the program to take the input and send it directly to the output. Okay, so we see it says I'm going to send some sample tracks to my Groove Agent and Hallian, so that's great. See Michael Pierce, does Cubase copy the SSL and that you need a separate computer for the automation? Yeah, and it's only stored on 10-inch floppy disks as well, so just kidding. Anyway. Okay, so from Tim Weinheimer, Greg, is there any templates or presets for my Arturia Keylab Mark II or universal templates for controlling the filter LFO speed for Retrolog 2, or do I have to assign each one of them individually? So, if let's say we have a Retrolog track. So I had a Retrolog track here. So it's pretty easy to do. So, if you wanted to just assign, so let's see. So a lot of times, these may be set to the default quick controls. So a lot of times, the program when it starts up, it may automatically extract the most relevant 8 quick controls, and you could define your Arturia to be the controller for, and come over here, learn, move the knobs, and those quick controls can automatically be assigned directly from there. But you could also just right click and click on, and Retrolog is great for this because you could just right click and learn CC and move the knob that you want to control that particular parameter. But a lot of those parameters you may just automatically find in the default quick controls, and you could have your Arturia map directly to control those particular quick controls. And just seeing more confirmation. So in the about the touch automation. So it says touch writes automation, and this is Raphael quoting from the manual. Writes automation data as long as you touch a parameter control, punches out when you release a control, and then sets a control to the previously set value. So the previously set value is the one at the end that's previously been set. So I can see where that could be perhaps misunderstood, but that's what I think, that's what it's referring to. And I've had like really extensive kind of discussions on that. All right. Okay, so just see, how did he bring the menu up for automating? So if you want to do this, if it's like this automation panel, you'll see where it says touch here. And then if you click just to the right of that, or you could hit the F6 key on your computer keyboard. So F5 would be your media bay, F6 would be the automation, and F7 would be direct offline processing. Right, receiving people that want to do collaboration projects in Discord. So yeah, I think that's a lot of fun. I enjoyed playing bass on the Hot Mess project, so that was a lot of fun. And wonderful to see Gareth on the live stream. All right, so we have a question: is there a way to manipulate the faders of multiple tracks simultaneously? All right, so let's say, show it in our project where it's a little more apparent. Okay, so let's say I want to take all of my drums, and so let's say I'll take all of my drums here. So one of the great things is this function called Q-Link, and we could also get this from Alt or Option plus Shift to turn it on or off. And once Quick Link is turned on, we can now just move one fader, and all those faders will move proportionally. So if I hit that again, I could disable Quick Link. I could now just come here, hold down those modifier keys, Alt or Option. Then I can move all selected channels. So that's the easiest way. We could also assign a permanent link to them. We could assign a VCA, but that's the easiest way, is just to turn on Q-Link, and that's Alt or Option plus Shift, and that will turn that on and off very easily, just to control multiple faders at once. All right, so you see John Costigan saying, if you're learning, please give a thumbs up. It's appreciated. So yeah, it allows us to continue to do these live streams. Okay, we have a question. Hello, Greg. Could you show me how to set up a sidechain compressor for bass and kick drums with stock plugins? Yeah, it's really easy to do. So let's come over here. Okay, so let's say I want to sidechain the kick. I want to sidechain the bass to the kick drum. So if I listen to it. So what I want to do is go to the synth track because I want to compress this. And I will go to the inserts and I put a compressor on it. So what I want to do is we have this little icon here. So VST3 plugins have sidechaining capability. And I'm going to activate the sidechain. And now I tell what sidechain source do I want to use with this little settings cogwheel. I'll turn that on and I'll select my track. So let's say I want this kick drum. And so now as soon as that kick drum comes in, that's going to do the sidechain for the compressor that's on the bass part. So we'll just now rewind here. And that's all you have to do. So once again, the source that you want to put the compressor, activate the sidechain, choose what channel that you want, and you could have multiple sidechain sources as well. Okay, so you see question, sir, how to color the entire channel in the arrange window? That is the region showing the VST mute solo button, etc. All right, so if I wanted to come here and colorize this portion of the audio, let me see, I always forget where this, it's in the preferences. Let's go to under user interface. I think if we go to we just see sometimes. Okay, so I think if we go to user interface, preferences, user interface, track and mix console channel colors, I think we could just click on show for selected channel. Let me see if that's it. No, all right, it's in the preferences here somewhere. So let me just. It's got like a little slider. Let me see if I can find it. I want to say that there's a little slider that's with it for intensity. Let me just try the tracks themselves. Okay, so yeah, that's it. All right, so go to, sorry for my brain cramp. Let's come over here to preferences, track and mix console channels. And then you could just click on tracks, and then you could adjust the channel strength as you want. So come here, and now you can see that this part has been colorized with the channel color. All right, so let's see, we just had a question. All right, let me jump to project here. So, all right, so the question is, I'll revert this project here quickly. Okay, so the question, please check something. In the score editor, note editing overlay, when I click the D, the piano will become a single line, very cluttered instead of the normal piano roll view. In M, is it bugged? All right, so let's come over here. Let's look at it in our score editor. And I'm going to enable the channel overlay view. Okay. All right, so reread the question here again. Just okay. When I click on the D, the piano roll becomes a single line, very cluttered instead of the normal piano roll view. In M, bugged. All right, so let's say. So, you know, as you hover over, so that's going to be just our display duration. So if I wanted to change that, but when I come to different notes here, so when I toggling back and forth between them seems to be the same here for me. So let's say if I go here to this voice and, you know, let's say I hover over this stave and toggle, or hover in between, it seems pretty consistent between the two different, between the display notation or the MIDI note duration for me. Okay, so we see from Graham Witchers, so glad you could make the live stream. He's checking in from the UK. He came just for Michael Team's ice cream. So we just see, can anyone play a score with 64th notes? Yeah, certainly. It just really depends on the tempo. You know, I could show you the, you know, depending on the tempo itself. I'll show you an example of the Schubert's, a pretty good example of this, where the tempo is around 41 beats a minute. So I'll just revert this. So this is where the tempo is. So we can see at this tempo, those short notes here in the violin are 30-second notes. So someone could play definitely twice as fast as that easily. So it really just depends on what the tempo is. Okay, reading through more questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, reading through more. Okay, reading through more questions. Lots of great discussion. That's a great discussion. I'm always 20 minutes behind. Okay, just reading lots of great discussion. Still reading. All right. Yep. I see from Steve Cummings. Hope to see you in Nashville as well. So we're having my first business trip next week in 18 months. All right. So I just see, hello, Greg. Can you confirm when native M1 support will be added to Cubase? So there's a lot of components, especially with third parties, that may never work with M1. So, the developers are looking into it and doing a lot of research and what parts will benefit from, the silicon chips. And there's a lot that don't. And a lot of parties, third parties won't be rewriting stuff. So we see some companies are now finally updating to like VST3. So, they're always doing more investigations, but they want to make sure that it doesn't necessarily, be all for nothing if there's a new M2 chip that comes out or whatever. So, but a lot of people are running it very happily. Just, some people are just, a bit dismayed by the lack of memory for composers. Okay, so I just see a question. Is there a quick key to remove the tabs? So I think it's like these tabs here. So if you get Option L, or Command Option L, Command Option R, or so Command Option L, Command Option R, so or Alt Control R, or Command Option R, Alt Control L, or Command Option L. Those are keyboard shortcuts. In the lower zone, it's B. So Alt plus Control or Command plus Option B for the lower zone, L for the left zone, R for the right zone. So B for bottom. See, Gareth thinks that Jeff Bezos built his rocket just to get over his divorce. So it's one method I've heard of. So. Okay, reading through comments. All right, so seeing kind of a lot of the same questions repeated again. So I can't answer them if I haven't read them yet. So I'll get to them as soon as I can. So, and you could always check the index. Okay, reading through more comments here. All right, so we have a question. Can you have more than 8 quick controls, or is there another way of getting more? So once you're at your quick controls here, so let's say if I just add an audio track, for instance. Okay, and you go to your quick controls. You could have quick controls presets. Like say, okay, I want volume and panning. Come right over here. I want EQs bands 4, EQs bands 2 and 3. I wanted to come over here, my sends level. So you could have 8 quick controls because most people, have 8 faders or 8 sliders on their controllers. So you could just come over here and switch between different preset functions for your quick controls and still not have to switch the 8 sliders around. And so a lot of people miss that. Okay, so we see Greg, how to copy a MIDI track part with just note on, note off for length quantized with all other expressions on it removed to begin assigning to new VSTI or MIDI instrument track. Okay, so let's say I have my violin one, and let's say I've written in all sorts of articulations in Let's take this over here. I'll just revert this quickly. Okay, so let's say I want to take this without the expressions. Okay, so I think if let's duplicate this particular track. So say we're going to duplicate the violin 1 track. Okay, and now let's get to see if we can do it in a logical editor. right, so let's see if we could. Okay, so what I did is I duplicated the particular channel. So here, if I double click, we have all the note expressions. I duplicated the particular channel and I chose to, under functions, to delete. Type is unequal to note. So this would delete everything that's not a note message. So once again, delete type, and usually it defaults to equal to note. But what you want to do is just unequal to note, and that will get rid of all of the expression articulations. Okay, hi Greg. If I'm upgrading from Cubase 7 to Cubase 11, I guess it's Cubase. Do my preferences still stay, or do I need to redo all my macros, etc.? So they'll be there. Going from that version. So I think in version 8, in Cubase 8, it implemented something called a profile manager that you could save a profile to. What I would do is to go through like your key commands and just save them as a preset. So sometimes if it, and give it a unique name in Cubase 7, and then that should automatically be carried over into Cubase 11. But it is just a file you could copy over, so you don't have to redo them and recreate all your macros. Okay, so I just see a question. How did you get your mixer down there? So if I had the lower zone open, I could just click on the Mix Console tab, and you could now see the mixer there. So, but let me know if I misunderstood, Drazi Eternal. Okay, so just see from many people, I think it's a question, let me read it. Many people ask about loud mixes. Is saturation key mixing process or mastering solution? When I master with FabFilter Limiter, it has a lot of dynamics, but oozes maximizer pump signal very much. So it's a bit of everything. So there's, quite a bit of experience, gain staging, some plugins, but, sometimes if, try not to rely so much on like a maximizer to get you that level. Like I remember being with a very well-known mix engineer, and he got the call while I was there, and he was probably a little embarrassed. And the mastering engineer called him, and he's like, you're putting a lot of stuff in your tube bus, and he's like, the project would be better if you actually, maybe took another stab at the mix and got the mix a little bit better before having to go, to, the final stage and kind of getting the pumping sound. And, and like a pro, he just said, okay. And he, took another stab at the mix, and the whole project ended up, benefiting from it. So sometimes I see a lot of people that mix with, the compressor, with like a mastering chain on all the time. And sometimes, that could be almost lying to yourself. Whereas if you kind of mix it to make it sound great without all that, and kind of get that gain really in the sweet spot, that when you put that stuff on after, it's going to be better, and you won't necessarily suffer the side effects of that. Okay. See Drazi saying, I'm so crazy, I never saw the mixer tab in the bottom window. So it's usually there by default for a lot of people. reading through more comments. Lots of great discussion. Okay, so I just see from Kai, Greg, do you ever use the ability to edit the MIDI in a track lane? I could not figure out how to make the little MIDI editor show up. So yeah, I use that for some editing tasks. So let's say if I'm here, and if you want to double click, instead of it going into the lower zone, what you could do is if you want to keep like your mixer, I think it's Control or Command plus Shift I for in place editor. And then you could just come right over here and see, especially if you're doing like a lot of MIDI editing tied with audio. So let's come here and I'll just make this all a little smaller. So now if I just wanted to come here to the viola part and just Command Shift I, and you could right click and go to the track control settings, and there is an in-place editor. So you could say edit in place and add. And once you do that, that will show up as an icon directly in the project here. So if you have that selected, you can just click and the edit in place editor will open up for you right there. Okay, reading through more comments. All right, sorry, my chat field just jumped. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. If you learned something, make sure you hit the like button. I see Jeff Sabelski says Liberace played all 64th notes. So that would probably be about right. So I had one of my friends who's friends with Debbie Gibson had her do a little birthday message and song for one of my college roommates, and she owns one of Liberace's old grand pianos. So it was interesting to see in a video. Gareth has admitted to playing 64th notes at quarter speed. So all right, so we see, hi Greg, is there a possibility to decide which event in foreground in case of overlapping? All right, so let's take a quick, I'll just do a new project, share this. I'll show it with another project here. Okay, so let's say I want to take this and let's say one MIDI note here. And I want to duplicate that note and I in this, I'm just going to change the pitch. All right, so when we do this, you know, if these two events are overlapping, so let's say, so I think I may have a preference for editing to delete overlaps, so I'll turn that off for demonstration purposes. All right, so let's say I have these two, and at that point you could, so if they're overlapping, you know, you could click on the edge of one of them. You could also go to the center, and so let's say this is Retrolog 01, and we'll call this Retrolog 02. Okay, and these two are overlapping. You want to pick which one has the priority. You could actually just kind of go to the center here and just choose which one will have the priority. So there's a little drop down menu. So that way you could pick and choose which one will play all the way through to the end. So now we'll see the pitch change. So, and if I wanted to go to, you know, Retrolog 1, that pitch should stay until this one begins. So that's how you could kind of do it. And there's also, like, you know, bring to front and bring to back key commands. You know, so you could do that as well. I think there are just, you know, under the editing, but there are, like, if we go to key commands, bring to front, bring to back as well. So right, just reading through more comments and questions. Okay, so I just see a question. Is there a way to reduce the size of icons and tools in bars so more tools can be opened? You know, so if you hold down another method, so the toolbox here will be fixed. You could also hold down the Control or Command key and see tools here with more options. And if you wanted this to be the default, when you right click, come over here to under Preferences, and you'll see Tools, and you'll see Show Toolbar on right click. Excuse me. So if I have that selected, I'll get this by default. If that's unchecked, if I want to see just a toolbar, I could click there. So again, editing under tools. And now I could right click and I just see the toolbar, but there isn't a way to resize these. So it's going to be consistent, but you could, you know, it will follow, like I have my cursor resize. So the tools themselves are rather large. So that's one thing you can do, but you can also adjust the screen resolution, and then everything will get smaller or larger depending on your screen resolution that you're using for your display. Okay, So I find the logical editor to be kind of intimidating. I've seen examples of how to use it to automatically color tracks, but not much else. Can you give some other examples? So there's lots of different uses for it. Usually it's a little easier to say, I want to do this, and like you saw, okay, I wanted to copy only the notes. I want to get rid of every other bit of information, so I can use the editor to do that. So if we go, there's a logical editor that's going to be for MIDI functions. So if I wanted to do stuff like, okay, I want to randomize every third note, or I want to randomize the velocity on a whole series of notes, and if you go to the project logical editor, like if I just wanted to delete all muted events, so any kind of different, select and hide disabled tracks. So let's say I have a number of tracks that are disabled, or I want to take every track that's selected and, but any type of scenario. But if you have like a scenario that you're kind of stuck in, that you do like really complex editings, you could set up criteria, and then there's things that you could do based on those conditions. Like I want to take every track that has, the word bass, and, like if you watch, I think Steinberg posted yesterday one of the videos I helped out with, the infected mushroom video. You can watch that in the Steinberg spotlights, and to them, every, kick drums are specific colors. This is specific colors, and when you get into like really kind of complex scenarios, like, okay, I just wanted to, enable solo on selected tracks, or so all sorts of different scenarios. So sometimes it's hard to figure out what to show, but if you just search for a logical editor, you'd see probably lots and lots of times it's been used in the live streams. All right, so we have a question. How do you execute the delete automation spike in Cubase automation panel? So I'm not sure what the spike is, but if I wanted to delete automation, and this could be like a logical editor thing as well. So let's say I had a lot of automation going on in a particular project. So I wanted to take the automation for the selected track. So if I wanted to delete the automation in the selected event, you could do stuff like that. But let's open up the automation panel, which is what I think this was. So I will come over here, and so here's the spike detection range. Okay. Okay, so let me just set this up here. I haven't worked with this in a long time, so let me just automate some parameters. So you can see that as, I think if we watch this, I'll make this larger so we could see it. So let's say I had the spike detection range for 200 milliseconds. So if I just and let's set that to like 20 milliseconds. and see if I do just a quick. So I don't know. I could read up on what that is for the next live stream if you want to send me an email. I don't know off the top of my head. Sorry about that. All right, so I just see from Nick, who had a question about the using the with the remote control is on using remote control is writing MIDI CC data as well. All right, let me just find it here. Sorry, lost my. So one thing that it might be, one thing you might want to try, Nick, out of curiosity, is if you go to your studio setup and let's go to your MIDI port setup, try to not have, if it's a touchscreen controller that's set up, try not to have it, try to uncheck it from in all MIDI inputs, because then it may not send that MIDI information to that particular track when you have all MIDI inputs. So try just, if the touchscreen has its own controller, try to disable the actual in all MIDI inputs from the MIDI port setup under studio setup from the studio menu. So we have a question: can Logical Editor be used to extract the lowest notes from a guitar or piano track to create a bass track, or maybe the kick and snare hits? So yeah, definitely you could do stuff like that. So let's say if I wanted to do, I might have just find a project I was thinking of here quick. All right, so let's say I wanted to come here and I drag this out. So if I wanted to do something like take the kick and snare out of this, so let's say, okay, my kick is going to be on C1 and D1 for my snare. Okay, so let's say I wanted to extract those to their own parts. So I'll come over here to Logical Editor, and I think if we choose to extract, or let's try an insert. All right, so I'm going to say we're going to do type MIDI note, and we're going to say value 1 is going to be C1. Okay, so if I do this, we see our last track here is synth bass, so I'll select that, hit apply. And let me just see if I do extract. All right, so now I chose function extract, and we can say type is equal to note C1, and now it's taken the C1 notes out of this particular pattern. So our C1 is gone. and it's automatically extracted it into this new track for us. Thanks again for all the great questions. So we see Michael Pierce often is sending out to his clients or to mastering engineer 2 copies, one with his master chain and one as clean. So that's a great suggestion. Thanks, Michael, for sharing. Okay, we have a question. Is there a command to unselect everything? So let's say I have all of these lovely events selected. Okay, so say I do a select all. So I think if you go to edit, select, there is a select none. So edit menu, select to select none. So I could select everything, and now we could go to edit to select none. And you could assign a keyboard shortcut for that as well. Okay. All right, so just see, I know Steinberg will kill dongles, but when will it be? Is there news? There's no additional news. So, but as soon as there's news that can be shared, I will let you know as soon as I have heard something. All right, I've been promoted from Cubase being La Leche to I've turned into El Lechero. That's good. I'm honored. All right. Okay, reading through. All right. All right. So we have a question. Hi, Greg. How can I change the paint bucket color without having to go to the toolbar at the top of the screen? So I think if you hit Alt-Shift-C, you can leave this as a floating window open, like somewhere in the corner if you want. So Alt or Option plus Shift plus C. And that way you won't have to go there if you wanted to kind of keep your colors. Over there, you could just kind of come over here, hit the key command, and be able to colorize events and tracks just using that function. So Alt or Option plus Shift plus C. Okay, it says I use Control plus left mouse wheel to resize all tracks, but it jumps quickly to very small or very large tracks, and it's had the same problem. Is there any way to get a finer resolution? So let's say if I do this, I'll just say select all my tracks here. So if I just kind of do it, if I pay attention and do that, but let me see if I hold down. Sometimes holding down the shift key can be like a fine control, but it doesn't seem to do it here. So I'm just holding down my control or command and just moving it vertically up and down like so. So that seems workable, and using that doesn't seem to bother me. All right, reading through more comments. Okay, so just see, hello. When I switch workspaces or I enable, disable right zone, there's a noticeable delay until it changes. I work with a very big template. Is any preference that could solve this issue? So sometimes if you're working with a large template, you might be just kind of on the edge of memory usage. So, so sometimes you may do that. If you, depending on your video card driver, you may want to see if you actually, if you have the latest gaming features enabled, try to disable those because sometimes those can get in the way. And sometimes, if you're on PC, enable or disable high DPI and see if that works better with your display driver. Okay, so just see, I work with Ableton, but wanted to switch to Cubase or Studio One because recording vocals is not that easy in Ableton. What's the cons and pros between Cubase and Studio One? So I think that you'll find that, Cubase is definitely kind of the innovative solution, and that we implement features like several years before other companies, and that you'll see that, Steinberg is definitely kind of, as Steinberg releases features, we're really kind of defining what is state of the art in music production that the other companies have to kind of copy, and just kind of the development breadth, between what you can get working with Cubase and Dorco and Wavelab and Nuendo and Halion can't really be paralleled by any other music software company. And one of the things that you have with Cubase is these live streams twice a week. So, where you just sit here and answer your questions for you. Okay, all right. So I think I may have reached the end, but of the discussion, I'm sure it'll jump up. I know we had a couple questions that were mailed in, so let's take a look at those. Thanks for all the wonderful questions from everyone. Hope that everyone has learned a new tip or trick. If you haven't hit the like button or subscribe to the channel, make sure you do that. Okay. I know we had some of these questions were answered during the live stream. Okay. Okay, so I see that Cubase chord track is a really powerful tool. The first question about it, I saw in many tutorials that you can create chords it have just notation, A minor, C, D, F minor, etc., for example. But what chords do I have under these big notation like A major, etc.? Right. So, and how can I set up my overall tonality in my scalar assistant after I create the chord track patterns? I'm not super good with music theory, so it'd be really help me For example, I got a scalar plugin and I created 8 chords. It showed me tonality, for example, D major, and then I could put it in the scale assistant, and then I could create other parts for my instruments. So if you are dealing with this, let's say if we have a chord track, so I'll just revert to this. So let's say, okay, I'll just come over here. Let's add some chords. All right, so if you have a chord track, one of the things is you could have this scale, so I find a lot of these scalar plugins kind of really odd because they don't really truly ever integrate. So like if I don't really know, my music theory, I could come here and, go to, like proximity or circle of fifths. And I could just say, okay, like my key is going to be, the key, like I'm in a key of G, and I could see that these chords are going to be the stronger harmonic chords. These are going to be not as related chords. And as we go farther out, these chords are less musically related. Now, once we've created a chord progression, we could come over here and we could see, all the different chords. But when we go to a MIDI editor, we could choose to, let's say if I go into, the edit view, you have your scale assistant, and we could use the editor scale or use the chord track. And at this point, you could just come over here and say, okay, I only want to snap to pitch editing. So as I do this, I can't move it where that note is out of key. It's only going to allow me to move it in the key. Plus, I could come here and say, show pitches from the scale assistant. So now any note that I draw in will be in key with the scale assistant. So I switch to the key of D. I can only draw in notes that are in the key of D. I can only draw in notes that are in the key of E or the key of F, and it will filter out from view all of the other chords. So I think this level of integration is why you want to have something like Cubase, where it can make a lot more sense because everything is truly integrated in there without having to use other types of functions or tools, plugins. Okay, so in the second question, when I created these chords in the chord track and moved them, for example, to my piano, they are in the same velocity. How can I randomize them quickly and give them a human feel? I know you showed in the logical editor, but I don't really understand how it works. Seems that is another power tool at Cubase, but I really don't understand the logic of this right now. I can learn more about this one. Of course, you can learn more about the logical editor, but if you go to, let's say so just on the MIDI track here, so I go to this electric piano, you can go to the MIDI modifiers. And if you don't see the MIDI modifiers tab, you can come right over here and make sure that the MIDI modifiers has a little check. And then once you're here, we could just have, okay, I want to randomize position. I want to randomize the pitch. I want to randomize the velocity. And I can say, I want to randomize the velocity between 50 and 100. And then on playback, all of your parts would, even though there was one velocity that's been entered, will be randomized between those two different values. So check out the MIDI modifiers, and there's lots of great things where you don't have to be intimidated by the logical editor. Okay, so we just see, I just upgraded from 11 from 10.5, and it seems that the horizontal scroll using Magic Mouse has reverse direction. Is this a bug, or is there a setting that can be used to control whether the zoom is in or out horizontally based on the left and right motion? So I think it's going to be tied to the system preference, and I think earlier versions might have toggled this behavior, but if you go to your mouse and just change the scroll direction to natural, that will change it in Cubase as well. All right, and we had a question from the last live stream that I had a brain cramp on, but I just wanted to jump back to it. And that was the difference in when doing a render in place between separate events and block events. All right, so a lot of times, let's say if I take these two events here and I wanted to render them in place, I'll go to my edit. Let's go to render in place. I go to the render settings. I will choose block events and let's render. So once I do that, it will come over here and create separate files. Okay, now if I choose, instead of block events for these tracks, and I do a render in place, and I choose these to be separate events, we'll notice that it looks kind of exactly the same. But what a block event is used for is when events are set up and they're going to be next to each other. So I could choose to have these render as individual events, or since they're directly next to each other, touching, when I do this, I can go to my render in place again. And I will say, let's do these as separate events. So I do it as separate events. We'll see 3 separate events for the length of each of those. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, just like the original parts. We'll undo that. But if I choose this as block events and render in place, since they're touching and we choose block events, this will automatically render it so that those 3 that are consecutive will be one block and one separate event. So that's the difference with that. Okay, we answered that one. Okay, we answered that. Okay, so we got all those questions that were mailed in. Let's go back to our live discussion. Thanks for all the great questions. All right, just trying to find my spot. So just see a nice comment from Michael Pierce is, it has to be said, the live streams are pretty much worth the cost of access to Cubase. Hope they keep going as long as Greg can cope with this all. So I enjoy doing them. So I think it's a great resource. So yeah, I think it will be going on. Okay, reading through more discussions. So we're seeing people like the quality of Yamaha products in general, even motorcycles. So yeah. All right, so I think I'm kind of at the end of the discussion. We'll see if there's any last minute questions. If not, I will wrap up. Thanks again for all the great questions. Once again, next Tuesday, I will have a business trip, so there won't be a live stream on Tuesday, but there will be the following Friday. So just a heads up with that. I'll remind people on I'll remind people on Friday's live stream. All right, we'll give it another minute. If not, we'll wrap up a couple minutes earlier. All right. Okay, with that, I guess we will go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for all the wonderful questions, and look forward to seeing everyone on Friday. And again, next Tuesday, we won't be doing a live stream, and the Friday after next, I think it's the 30th or 31st, we'll be doing our Zoom meetup. So I look forward to seeing everyone there. So everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see everyone on Friday afternoon. Goodbye.